Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Keep Calm and Homeschool through 2021. This is our final session. Remember, everything is available to you for the next 30 days, but this session, we are taking live questions. So feel free to put the questions. I have a computer right here, so we're going to run through some things and then put any questions that you might have right there in the chat, and I will grab them and I will ask these ladies live. So let me tell you a little bit about this session, particularly, and these great ladies who are sitting next to me. First of all, this session is called Transition from Classroom to Home Education. How's it going? And I have with me my partner in crime, Judy. Been with me the whole time. Hi, Judy. Welcome.
Hey, Steph. How are you doing?
Good.
All right. We're almost through with this. Yes.
Yay.
So yes, I'm a veteran homeschool mom of 3 amazing adults and just starting a second generation of Sonlighters in our family. I'm also the Sonlight Marketing Sales Coordinator, which is a fancy term for being able to get together with a group of amazing women who go out on the convention road all summer long, hopefully this summer, and meet you at your local convention and talk with you about their passion for homeschooling with Sonlight.
Well, thank you for being here and keeping me in check as usual. And welcome, Anne.
Hi, thank you, Stephanie. My name is Anne. I live in Texas, and I do hope to be on the convention floor meeting many of you this season. I currently have 2 children in homeschooling. They are both in high school this year. I have a freshman and a junior, and I've been homeschooling since 2007.
Very good. Thank you. And Christy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm Christy, and I've been homeschooling for 12 years. I have 4 sons, and our oldest graduates this year, and we have a 6th grader, so 6th through 12th grade right now. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully you on the floor somewhere in some city around the country this year, and I'm glad to be here.
Very good. Thank you for being here. And Karen, welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm Karen. I'm from Southwest Missouri, and I'm a retired homeschool mom like Judy. I have 4 adult children, and we homeschooled with Sonlight for 15 years. It was a wonderful experience for us. And I'm also hoping to be on the convention floor this year and be able to talk to all of you.
Very good. And Sheila, welcome.
Hey, I also have 3 kids that I homeschooled. They are now all out of my homeschool. 2 are out in the world and 1 is still in college.
Perfect. Well, I'm so grateful that you're all here. And reminder, put your questions in the chat and we will make sure to address them. So let's start a little bit with the difference between a classroom versus the one-on-one home education option. So what distinctly is the difference?
Well, I think you said it in your question. In a classroom setting, you're going to have a teacher with 10, 15, maybe 20 students. In a home education setting, it's very often one-on-one or one-on-2. So it's truly a pure tutorial relationship, which allows you the advantage of teaching to that child's strengths and that child's weaknesses.
Right, there's a lot of benefits. So let's talk about the benefits a little bit.
I especially like the fact that I could tailor things to my child specifically. And, so if they were way ahead in something, I could let them go. If they needed a little more work, or we needed to go back to some basic concepts because I could see they were missing something, I could do that as well. And because it wasn't in a classroom setting, it's not like they would be embarrassed. Oh my gosh, they see that I'm needing to redo some phonics, or I don't have my math facts down yet. And so that helped a lot. We made it very, it's no big deal. We'll just go back and run over these again, and then we'll continue on. So I think that helped a lot.
And one of the benefits of doing homeschool, you do have more free time. I have the 2 I homeschooled, and we use 2 different levels of Sonlight. And so while I was taking turns, with one or the other had free time. So you've got your guidelines for your home. You don't do your screen time or video games until school's over, but they still have breaks. And so they can work on their passions during those breaks. So when they're young, it's creating with Legos. When they're older, it might be just reading books on a certain topic that they love. And that's a neat thing that they can do in homeschool that there's just not time for in the public school setting.
What about focusing on the topic that they love the most? You know, you really get the ability, if you're homeschooling, to say, wow, they really enjoy, I think someone earlier used the term polar bears. It might have been you, Sheila. I don't remember who it was. They were talking specifically about polar bears. And I thought, well, if you love polar bears, you can spend a lot of time on polar bears, right?
Yeah, my boys went through a solar system phase, you know, and we had like constellations up on the ceiling and we had extra books and we could do videos and things like that. Because like you said, you have that time. You're not going to school for 6 hours and then doing 2 hours of homework. You're schooling for maybe 4 to 5 hours, depending on their age. And then that's it, you're done. And so then they can explore the areas that they're really passionate about.
I have a son who is in middle school. He's in his last year of middle school, and he loves to write. And so he has come up with this entire series of 12 books that he wants to write. He started the first one. So I'm able to, it's good too. He writes well. And so as he's writing, I alter what we're doing for homeschool, you know, so his language arts program may not include that writing assignment. Or, you know, through the years as he's written, if we were doing a language arts program that required a certain assignment on a certain day, you know, I could alter that. I didn't have to do every assignment because he was doing it on his own. And so, whereas, you know, might tackle another subject, you know.
Right. And another thing, when you get to that high school level, you know, at the public schools, they offer certain classes. And of course, you can offer those in your homeschool, but you can end up with classes that they couldn't get anywhere else. My son is real interested in history. He ended up just getting every book he could on World War II. And so he basically studied and read and watched documentaries and created a study of World War II. And so I get to put that on his high school transcript.
And even taking it back to the younger level, one of my guys went through a series, a stage where he loved letters. Just the letter factory was out and these little frogs that liked all these letters. So he gathered every letter that we had in our home. He loved to play. He had every toy letter and he had them all in this drum that he would keep. And when he did spelling, he would grab his letters and he would make his words with his favorite thing, his bin with all the letters in it. And it had every kind of toy you can imagine with all these different letters. So he would practice his spelling words in a fun way. Playing.
Yeah.
He thought he was playing. He was learning.
Yeah. And at the high school level, I think it's especially nice because your students can pursue their passions. They can adapt and adjust their schedule so they can work part-time. Every one of my kids started college with a fairly decent bank balance because during their high school years, they had the opportunity to adjust and adapt to their schedule academically to make room for working outside of our homes. So lots of benefits there.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved for my high schoolers was that they learned time management skills. When you're in a classroom, the teacher dictates, you know, first period, second period, third period, you have 40 minutes, and then you have to do these things. Whereas when they're at home and they're following the instructor's guide, they have a job, they have to figure out, you know, what pockets of time they have to do their work so that then they can also work. And so they really did learn time management skills so that when they went to college, they knew how to do that. They didn't, you know, they were not used to having a daily class schedule. They fit it in and they were able to succeed.
So what about evaluating success at this point? You're halfway through the year, or even you're new to homeschooling. How do you evaluate success, learning?
I think you can see the progress that they're, you know, and like when my kids were younger, I never graded anything. My first year, I was really paranoid about that. I felt like, how do I grade? And then I realized I'm working with her. I know whether she knows how to spell that word. I know if she knows all of her addition facts or whatever. And so I think that's one of the big things, you know, going back to the one-on-one thing, you can tell immediately, did they get that? Did they not? Do I need to go back and explain it a different way? And so it's more, you're working to make sure they understand it, not finish that page, I'll grade it, we'll move on. And, when they get to the high school level, it's of course different. You have to have a transcript. And so, that can help create a measure of it. But still, you're going to, have your pulse on how things are going. And, when you're discussing history with them, are they understanding, not just the facts, but what happened, why, the why behind it and whatnot. So things kind of evolve as they get older. And especially because they're working more independently, I think it's a little harder to stay on top of that when they're high schoolers, because they're working independently. You're not having that. It was really easy when they were young to know whether or not they got it.
I think too, a lot of, especially as new homeschoolers, but this plagues veteran homeschoolers as well. And that is, am I successful? Am I being successful as a homeschool parent, as a homeschool mom or dad? And I think a lot of times just watching for that progress that Karen described really does say that you are doing what you need to do as a homeschool parent teacher. And so a lot of times I think we use the term success when we really are comparing, and we're looking at what other people are doing in their homeschool, and wow, my kids aren't doing this, or my kids don't know this, and they're in the same grade as these children are, and I must be failing. When in reality, you are teaching your children, and you know their unique needs and their strengths and their weaknesses. And therefore you are being successful because you are teaching what you know.
And everyone has hard days where you do feel
Yeah.
like, wow, this is filling. And then you realize, okay, it gets better. And then, we can't promise that won't happen again, because it kind of happens. And then you realize, okay, we can make it through this. Oh, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then it's a cycle. These things, I mean, for me, don't you think that's true?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. You go through your good days and your bad days. And your children are not finished. You have one bad day, you haven't ruined them.
Yeah.
You've got the next day and the next day. And you just keep plugging away. I remember my kids were both in elementary school, and I don't remember why it was a really hard week, but we had a really hard week for some reason. And I looked online to see about our local Christian private school and to see what information I could find about it. And I found two things. I found that they used a competitive curriculum that I didn't think would be a good fit for my children. And then I saw the cost of the private school, and I knew I had to make this work. And so, okay, well, we just got to make this work. And now they're both in high school, and I've just seen them progress. Like Judy said, you were looking for progress. The preschool year for my son, my whole goal was for him to hold his pencil correctly. And if that's all we get done in preschool, that's my goal. I just want to see that progress. So it can be that way in every subject. It doesn't, matter if they're doing the same thing as another fifth grader down the street. If you see them making progress, they will get to where you need them to get to.
That's important. It took me a couple of years when I first started homeschooling to realize I will not be teaching them everything. The schools don't teach them everything. Right. They graduate not knowing everything, and that's okay. But if you can help them enjoy learning and know how to learn, then you have succeeded. You have done what you were supposed to do.
That brings me back to the grading thing. This workshop is from classroom to homeschool, which my children never did. They've been homeschooled from the beginning, but I was a classroom teacher before I started homeschooling. And I taught high school. And I saw just the mentality that if it's not for a grade, it doesn't matter. And I didn't want to instill that in my kids. I wanted them to want to learn things because they want to know about it and they find learning interesting. So in Texas, where I live, we don't have to submit grades. I know every state is different. Obviously you have to fulfill the laws of your state. Right. But I do encourage new homeschoolers not to be concerned about grades. You just look for the progress. And if they're not getting that math problem, you just keep working on it until they get it.
Yeah, I used to joke with friends that my kids all got A's because we kept doing it until they got it. We were after mastery. Yeah. And I was sharing, I have three kids. So my oldest, we homeschooled from the beginning. And then in 9th grade, he wanted to go to this private school that he was playing sports at. because they would allow homeschoolers to play sports. And so we eventually conceded and let him go. And that was the first time that I thought, have I prepared him? Like, because up until then, I wasn't focused on grades. We didn't care. We were making progress. And so his first report card was my first report card. Like his report card was going to prove if I had prepared him. And we had actually homeschooled him halfway through 9th grade. So when he applied to this private school, I had to submit a transcript. By golly, I'm a strict grader. So he did not make straight A's in my school. He graduated from that private Christian school that we paid good money for with straight A's, except for the B that I gave him. So he was so mad at me. He's like, Ma, I could have graduated with a 4.0, but because of your transcript, I'm like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm a tough grader, But it just shows
You
that
have high standards.
I have very high standards.
I think it also helps to, so that we don't get focused on grades, to set goals for your school year, set expectations. And they don't have to be lofty or unreachable goals. My husband has a saying that if you don't aim at something, then you're not going to hit anything. And so setting those goals can also help you look at the success of your homeschool as you reach those goals, regardless of whether there's a certain grade attached to it or not, or whether you're comparing to someone else. If your child in a given year has been struggling with reading, and by the end of the year you conquer and meet that goal, then your school year is a success.
Yeah.
Even if you've made progress from where you were at the very beginning, while you may not totally conquer it, but if you can look at the progress, then you're successful. Absolutely.
And I have a son who had speech therapy in his early years, and his language development came along as we, were even entering the elementary years. And for me to see him in, he was resistant at first to sitting down with, books with words. He loved the book Rosie's Walk, because guess how many words are in Rosie's Walk?
0.
0. He loved it. He was about a little fox and he would read it and laugh. He thought that was hilarious. And he had to be brought along to where at the end of BC, at the end of the world history, he was able to say, when he was reading Child's History of the World, this is the first time I knew that a book without pictures could be interesting. And it was at the end of that 2 years of us reading that book. And then later on, in his middle school years, it was fun to watch him. And this was progress for me and success for me to see him pulling out books and saying, wow, I wonder, when he was trying to write something, okay, this was about castles. We had some books about castles, and getting those. And he's like, laid out on the floor, reading all these books and doing research, and so we came so far. And so along the way, it was hard. And there were years and times that I was so discouraged, but, to see those little victories of him becoming interested and then coming along. So sometimes you do have to zoom out and don't feel like a failure because 1 year doesn't have the progress that you want, because it builds and you have time and where you're leaving off 1 year and where you want to start the next year. And it takes, just dedication and persistence and patience to know that it will keep coming. It will keep developing.
Talking about goals too, you can set different goals for different children.
Absolutely.
So the two that I homeschooled through high school are very different. One is dyslexic, one is not. And so when the child who was not dyslexic, he was able to read everything in a high school Sonlight level and no problem. The girl who was dyslexic and could not handle the quantity of books that a Sonlight high school level has, I continued to read aloud to her through 11th grade. It was halfway through 11th grade that my daughter said, okay, Mom, I got this. And I could have cried. I could have cried that day because I thought, I'm going to go to college with this child and read aloud to her textbooks, And so that was huge. But I trimmed out a lot of the readers for her because she literally could not do it. She still made an A because she met the goals that I had set for her, even if they were not the same goals for my son.
So what about, I want to go back to the failure thing. What advice do you have when you feel like a failure? Like the moms who might be struggling and they feel like it's failing. This whole thing is just failing. What encouragement would you provide?
I think it helps to stop and distinguish what makes you feel like you're a failure, identify it. In other words, don't let the emotion of failure set the course for you. Stop and analyze or diagnose or whatever fancy term you want to use and figure out why you feel like a failure. Do you feel like a failure because you're investing time in homeschooling, but your house cleaning isn't getting done? Are you feeling like a failure because you're keeping up with the laundry, but your 6-year-old still can't read? I think you need to identify first and then work on some solutions. And maybe you're at your wit's end and you can't come up with a solution. So find some community that can give you that encouragement. Maybe a homeschool mom that's a year or two down the road ahead of you on the journey. Pick her brain. Find out what she did when she was discouraged or felt like a failure. Maybe you don't have someone like that in your life right now in your circle of friends. So join us on Sonlight Connections, because we have a big community there and lots of encouragement there. So I think really first you have to figure out what it is that's making you feel like a failure.
And I think realizing pretty much, and again, this is something when I started off homeschooling, you think I'm the only one who must be going through this. So what you were saying about if you can find wherever it is a community of other homeschool moms, you will find out probably every single one of them has felt that way. Mm-hmm. And that's all it took for me to relax more, not take it personally, and then the other thing goes along with what Sheila was saying about having goals for your kids. At the beginning of the year, I would write out what curriculum I'm using, for math and spelling and, history and all that stuff. And particularly for that child, what am I trying to work on? And every quarter I would go back and I would write just a little evaluation. How are we doing with this? And sometimes that was a really good check for me, because I might be feeling like a failure, but I could sit down and look at this and say, you know what, we have come a long way with this. Okay, yeah, we might have had a few bad days, but there has been progress, or if I'm getting like halfway through the year, I can go back and say, oh, look, this evaluation said this, and we're even further than that. So I think a reality check, because like you said, feelings can be overwhelming. And, I think having the facts, being able to look at it there and say, yeah, this is working. Maybe not every day, but overall, we're doing good.
But there are times that there may be something actually wrong, something that's going on, and you can't ignore it. You can't just be like, oh, we'll deal with it tomorrow. So if your child is struggling in an area that maybe it's too hard or well, it's usually too hard. It's never too easy. But it might be that you need to get some remedial help. It may be that you need some outside help. Maybe you need a tutor. Maybe it's an area of strength that is not an area of strength for you. And so you might need to bring someone in that will help with that. I'm thinking particularly for me, I'm not a math person. So once we hit 6th grade math, beyond that, I needed outside help. And so whether you outsource that to a co-op, or you hire a tutor, or you do team teaching where a friend teaches your child their area of strength and you teach their child. And sometimes that really works because you get a little accountability. You have to do that writing assignment because that other child is expecting it to be done, and vice versa. So sometimes it can be, you might feel like a failure, but it's indicative of there's a problem and I need to figure out what I need to do to solve it.
And remember that feelings often lie. They really do. And so that's why it's important to identify the truth of the matter.
Your saboteur, your inner saboteur, kind of, whenever you doubt yourself. I also want to say that Sonlight Connections, you can find it at sonlight.com/connections. So if you're not part of the Facebook group, go there and you can find out all that information. So a reminder that you can put your questions in the chat and we will address them. So if you have any questions, go ahead and stick them in there now. And I am going to get started on the questions that we had. So put them in there. All right. I would love some advice on how to interact with my child when I can't read all the books. Anything?
Well, I think a beginning point is the discussion questions in the IG. I do try to, well, when my kids were little, it was easier. I tried to read all the books over the summer. When they got to high school, they're longer, it's harder, you know. So, you know, if you choose even just a few books and decide to really go in depth on those, I'll read those and we'll really talk about that. That's another option. Or I think we were talking about it earlier, I think narration, having them say, asking them, so tell me about this book. You know, what's going on about this book? Tell me about that character. You know, what do you think about that character? What they're doing in this book, whatever. So then you're getting them to narrate and they're having to explain the book, and then you can also interact.
And I think there's value in not always reading the books that your child is reading. One of the things I used to say to my kids was, I need you to tell me about that book because I've never read it. So I want to understand what you took away from that book. And if they couldn't tell me about it, I would often have them go back and read it again.
I do think that I handle this differently with different boys, my sons. But there are some books that I just let them enjoy. I don't try to discuss every book. And one of my boys, just in the car, we'll be driving down the road and we'll start talking about it. And I just have to barely start it. And he is off to the races. He tells me everything and what he was thinking about when he was reading it and all of that. And I have another son who looks like a deer in the headlights anytime I ask him about any book, because he looks like, oh no, I'm supposed to have remembered that and I don't know. And he thinks he doesn't. But in the middle grades especially, I let him draw cartoons to show me what he had learned. So like he would take a piece of paper, draw fourths, draw it into fourths, and then he would, do each scene of the book. And then I could look at those scenes and I could tell, oh, it wasn't the girl that was in the tree, it was the boy that was in the tree. And he'd be like, oh, okay, I didn't understand that, it didn't make sense. And we could talk about it from there. So I think with different students, you're going to have different ways of covering it, but different ways work for different ones.
Yeah.
So that child that went to private school, he took AP Lit and they read 6 books the entire year. So if all you do is cover 6 books, you're at an AP Lit level. There you go. Let them enjoy the other books and only talk about a handful of them.
And we also have, and I will drop this in the comments came from the Sonlight Connections Facebook group. We have a piece that was created that talks about engaging with books and how you can go through that process with your children. So I'll drop that link in this particular question. This was Jeremy or Sabrina L. So I will drop that link. Look for that link. Okay, so we get this question a lot. I think a lot of people are new to homeschooling this year. So how do you convince your child that you are a teacher?
You wear a label that says, I am a teacher, and you must listen to me.
Does it work?
Yeah, that can be a really tough one. It really can. I think it's real important just to communicate and set your expectations. Let them know what you expect of them. And if there are going to be any consequences, they know ahead of time what those will be, and that you follow through. I know from my time as a high school teacher, that's the thing I did on the first day of school. I let them know what this class was all about, what I expected of them, and what, consequences were if, they didn't turn in their homework or whatever else. So communicating your expectations is really important. And there have been many times where I have said, I had to explain, now, I know you're acting this way right now towards me. Think about how you would act towards your coach. My kids that are in sports, I know you wouldn't do that, and so, and comparing the relationship as teacher to them, with some other relationships that they may have outside of the home, and helping them to see how they should behave towards you as teacher.
And it's a lesson that grows with maturity. It absolutely is. It ties in with lessons on respect and respect for authority. And I think it's a lesson that you have to teach over and over. And I think it's a lesson that you have to teach in the moment. You can read lots of great stories about character qualities, but this truly boils down to respect for authority. And it's not a bad thing for them to say, but my teacher said, especially if you are coming from a classroom setting to a homeschool setting, of course there's going to be comparison. They know that, and that is familiar. They don't know this yet. And so I think you have to give grace and remember that it's going to take time for them to start seeing you not only as mom or dad, but also as teacher. And so I think with time and repeating the lesson over and over again, that's great that your teacher said that. I'm not sure I would have thought of that. That's really great. But guess what? Today, I'm your teacher. And so I'd like you to think about it in this direction or from this perspective. And so I think it's a lesson that takes time.
We kept some elements that I liked from my oldest son. He attended public school kindergarten, and his teacher, whenever she really wanted to encourage them to think hard, about their answers. So whenever they thought hard, they got to kiss their brain. So we still do that in 12th grade. Every now and then he writes something that's really good. I was like, ooh, kiss your brain. And he does it. So we keep some of the good elements that we've had, and then also I think just a heart-to-heart conversation with my child if they're having trouble, which we've kind of already covered. But when they get older, my high school student, I know I had to change some things I'm doing to be consistent, because maybe for co-op, if he's in a class for co-op, that gets done every week. But the subjects he's doing at home, I say we're going to meet at this time, but then something's happening. So I have to carve out the time to say, okay, I'm making this commitment. It will happen at this time. We'll sit down and have coffee or whatever, and we'll do this together. So I think it's important for, to set that time to discipline myself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Karen, you brought your kids home from school.
I did.
Do you have it from public school or private school?
Private school.
Yeah. So do you have any specific advice on that transition, or did it go pretty smoothly for you?
Well, I only brought one home first. It was very incremental. So because the school was a very good school and they were doing well there, but she ended up missing some concepts. And then when they started building on it, everything fell apart. And so I just brought her home, and my intention was I was just going to homeschool her. And probably in the back of my mind, I was thinking it would only be maybe a year or so, get these foundations done, and then put her back in the school. That was my plan. Didn't work out that way. So bringing her home, she was very glad to come home. So she and I had no problem with the transition. Halfway through that year, I ended up bringing my 7th grader home, her brother, who is totally different. So for that one, in the beginning, and by that time I had heard what they tell you, if they've been in school for a while, give them, a week for every year they were in school to kind of de-school. And so I did that. So I actually, even though he's 4 years older than his sister, I threw him into the program she was doing, because she was actually on the young end of that program. But then I'd go to the library. We were doing D, and we were studying the Revolution by that point. And I went to the library, got books on battles, because I knew he'd like that. And then I would leave them on the table. And maybe I would read them to myself, just let him see me read, but I never told him to read. And eventually he started picking them up and reading them and all this kind of stuff. But I eased into it with him. And after that first year, I gave him the choice every year, public school or homeschool. If you choose homeschool, remember, you have to do it. And so I put it on him a lot. He was older. He was 8th grade the next year. So I think one thing that helped was the fact that we kind of sectioned off mom time from school time. So we had a schedule, and the scheduled time, we have things that we're doing, and you know, this is when I'm the teacher. And then when we're not having that time, then, you know, I'm mom and things are back to normal. So I think that kind of helped, having that little bit of, you know, it wasn't a real strict schedule, but it was like during these hours, we're doing school. So I think that helped a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this question. We have actually two questions that are very similar. So I'm going to say them both and then we can address them together. So the first one was, what advice for a child who's unwilling to participate? And then we just got another question that says, do you have quick tips for a stubborn child? So I feel like they're very similar, so we can probably address them together. Any advice?
Well, one thing that, well, we've just always done it, I think it helps, is to give your child a little bit of choice in the matter.
Yeah.
If you have all the subjects that they're supposed to do each day, and you can let them choose. You know, what do you do first? What do you do second? We never did say 8 o'clock to 8:30 is this, 9 o'clock to 9:30 is this. You know, these are the things we do, and we're done with them. We're done with school. If they have a say in it, then that can help their attitude a little bit, and that they want to participate.
I remember also having some very straightforward conversations with my kids, because I think for the most part, most kids test this boundary. They try to see how far they can go without, you know, pushing too many of mom or dad's buttons and, you know, refuse to do something or refuse to participate. And so we had a conversation as to the fact that, you know what, dad goes to work every day and there are things about his job he just doesn't like, but he doesn't have a choice. He has to do his job because there are consequences if he doesn't. You know what? I don't like doing laundry, but what would happen if I stopped doing laundry? And we would talk about it in a larger context so that it became less about them and it became more about the choice that we were making. And then once we talked through those consequences to what happens if dad doesn't show up to work or if mom doesn't do the laundry, then we talked about the fact that all choices have consequences, even yours. And at this point, you have a responsibility to participate in school. It's even a legal responsibility. By law, you have to learn. And so then we talk about in our household, if you choose not to learn, this is the consequence. And you know what? That's your choice. That's on you. It's not me. I can't choose for you. You have to choose to learn, to want to learn. And I will set the expectation for you up front. Here's what's going to happen if you don't choose to learn. And then you have to decide what is a consequence that truly is a cause of pain for your child. Maybe it's removing electronics. Maybe it's you don't get to go to the park with your siblings this week. Maybe it's the sleepover at Johnny's this Saturday night is not going to happen if the school doesn't happen first. And so we teach them to own their choices.
We have a lot of conversations at my house about jobs. Like you said, like this is your job. Your job is to learn. My job is to go work at Sonlight. Dad's job is to make bacteria for cheese. You know, like we all have jobs. This is your job. So anyway. Anything else? Any other little tidbits of advice for the stubborn?
I think one big, it kind of takes off on what Ann said is, and this is more for when your kids are older, because my kids were older when they started, is getting buy-in from them. So one of the reasons we ended up bringing home my 7th graders because at the Christian school, they changed curriculum at the 7th grade level and he hated it and just quit doing it. He's my strong-willed child. And so what we did is, you know, he finished out that school year, you know, with whatever curriculum we could bring together. We took him to the homeschool convention and my husband took him to every single booth that sold math, made him sit down, try out the program. He chose which program. So then later on, you know, we were like, you're the one who picked this, you know, you need to do your math. You need to take ownership of that. So, you know, and, you know, when possible, you know, get their input on what they'd like to do and whatnot. But there are some times where you just have to put your foot down and say, like Judy said, this is what we have to do. And here are the consequences if you don't.
And for a younger child, I know when my kids were young, they really always wanted to know what was going to happen. You know,
If they didn't,
and so, yeah, they just, what's next? What's next? What's next? That kind of
what's
thing.
next?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
What's next? What's next? And so just having things explained. After we do this, then we will do such and such, and then that gets their minds in a groove of the flow of things, and that just helped them when they were younger.
Yeah, back to what Karen said, at the beginning of the year, I did just did a special little thing with each of my guys, and we went out to whatever place they picked and sat down together and did a planning meeting for the year. And so the buy-in part, they helped plan the year. So my 8th grader didn't have to take Latin like his brothers. We talked about it. Why do people choose different languages? So he's learning French, and he is thriving with French. He's watching movies in French, listening to French. He told me last night, he sent me a text today that he dreamt in French last night. He had a dream in French. Like, he was speaking French, people were speaking back to him, and he could understand them. And he's in 8th grade, and this is his first year to do the subject, but he's so passionate about it. He's, the listening time that they're supposed to do each day, he's done way more than he had to every
Because
day.
he chose it.
Because
it.
chose it. So when you get that buy-in, it's pretty powerful.
Yes, the buy-in does a lot. Now, one of my children always chose math last. Imagine that. And after, a little bit of time with that, we realized, I realized as the teacher, this does not work. This ends our day on a bad note because you don't like math, and that's why you picked it last.
Yeah.
So then we talked about it and discussed it, and so that he understood why he would get to choose the order of his subjects except for math, and it had to be done first. And we had to do that for a few years, but then it got better. Like we said, progress. When you stick with it, you see the progress.
Yeah.
And it's not like that anymore. So there's hope.
I think too, when you're bringing a child home from school, they know what the expectation is at school. I go to school, I sit in a classroom for 6 hours, I come home, I have 2 hours of homework or whatever. When that changes at home, you can spin it in a positive way. Like, when you're finished with this, and you can show them the schedule you create, you're done. You don't have to do homework. So I remember this one year, my middle child would wake up in his little tighty-whitey underwears and come stumbling out of the bedroom, sleep still in his eyes, grab his math book and start to work. And I'm like, buddy, do you want some breakfast first? He's like, no, because as soon as I finish my schoolwork, I can go play. Like, he knew, like, I just got to get it done. So then I'm free. So maybe having that conversation, like, look, you only have to do these 4 things today or whatever. And then you're free to go outside and play or to do whatever it is that they like to do. And so maybe if you can just spin it in a positive way, as opposed to you have to sit here,
I have actually this year have a 16-year-old who I found at the dining room table the night before doing his algebra 2 for the next day, because he knew that if he finished, he could work on what he wants to do. And this young man loves downtime more than anything in the world. And so he had something planned that he wanted to do, a project he was working on. And so the night before, he was in there doing it. So, but if he knows that he has to finish that thing. So if the expectation is set,
right,
that this is the schedule, you must do these things in order to get to the free time. It doesn't have to be, but just having free time.
And I think too, for the parent to maintain control, which, coming from me, I'm a pretty passionate person. So, but to not engage in the emotion, like the child could be having a meltdown or a tantrum, and just be like, you know what? I think you need to take a little time. When you're ready to join us, you can come back, and just not engage, not start yelling and getting upset too, because they know how to push our buttons, but we have to resist that. Because it's like when a policeman pulls you over. I don't know if you've ever been pulled over. I've been pulled over a couple times. And, you see those lights in your rearview mirror, and immediately your heart starts to race. And he doesn't come up yelling, why were you speeding? And why, he doesn't come up yelling at you. He's very calm and collected. I'm the one who's dying. And so you need to be the police officer and be the strong one while your child is having their meltdown.
And I think to add on to that, as a parent teacher, you have to be consistent and not give up.
Yes.
Their behavior is not personal for you. They don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I annoy mom today? That they don't think that way. And so their behavior and their meltdowns and their resistance is an I-focused kind of thing. You, as the adult with more experience under your belt, have to be the one that resists that. Like Sheila says, don't get sucked into their temper tantrum. You have to remain cool. I used to look at my kids and say, you know what? I need to not see your face for about 5 minutes. And so I would send them, go sit on your bed for 5 minutes and I will call you. But I did it every time and it was always just 5 minutes. And when it was done, then I would go in and we would have a calm discussion. And if they weren't ready, then I would make it another 5 minutes. But we would have a conversation that said, okay, what could we do differently next time so that this doesn't happen? But you have to be the adult always in that situation. You can't let the child become the one that directs the course.
And I wonder too, if you have an older child, if you sat down and had a planning meeting and say, what would make our homeschool better? Like, what is it that is missing that you really want? And it could be like, I just want to sit with a cup of coffee. Can I have coffee? And they may be 14. And so you make them decaf. Like maybe you don't want them caffeinated just yet, but maybe there's something you can do that would honor the child's request. That is not, you're not giving into them, but you're compromising, you're meeting them halfway and you're finding a way to bridge that gap.
The next question we have is how to stay focused, but I did want to add this on. There might be a chance that your child needs to exercise before you get to school. So or get to learning. So I wanted to throw that out there too. If he or she is unwilling to participate, make them run around for a little bit and come back in and see if that changes it.
I had a student one time that I would tell to run around the house. I was homeschooling, well, working with another family. And whenever he got to a point, I would say, okay, I want you to go run around the house. And he would run around the house and he'd come back in. And eventually he'd be over there and he'd be like, can I run around the house? And I would be like, yes, please go run around the house. And he would say, can I go twice? And I was like, by all means. And he would run around the house twice and he'd come back in. He's like, okay, I think I can do it now. You know?
We have a friend who says a tired dog is a happy dog.
Yeah. I would send my son out to the cul-de-sac, like go, I need 10 times around the cul-de-sac. And I would see him up there running 10 times just as fast as he could around
And
the
I think
cul-de-sac.
the thing to recognize is sometimes there's a physical reason for why your child can't participate. And it may mean a need for exercise. Maybe it's a blood sugar issue. Maybe your child needs some food.
A snack.
Maybe you need to look at what your child's eating. If a child is primarily consuming sugar and then coming to the table to do math, that's not going to work. And so sometimes it doesn't hurt to look at a physical reason. What time did they go to bed last night? Did they get 10 hours of sleep? Did they get 8 hours of sleep? Maybe they need more sleep.
Did they stay up reading a Sonlight book?
Maybe they're going through a growth spurt and they need more sleep than they typically need. So it doesn't hurt to look for a physical cause as well.
So let's talk a little bit more about focus. I think that was a really good transition specifically into focus. This question came through, a parent might have ADHD or the child might have ADHD. How do we really get them to focus? So the first thing is exercise. If you have an ADHD child, run. I mean, that's for real, run. I also have mine stand up when he's doing things. I'm like, you don't need the chair, just stand up. It's totally fine. Any other things?
My ADD, he wasn't ADHD, but he was ADD and he wasn't even diagnosed. I just knew that I called him squirmy, and he literally would read with his book in front of him, walking around the house. My husband would come home for lunch going, what is he doing? I'm like, he's reading. He's like, that's not reading. You sit on the couch to read. I'm like, not this one, and that's the beauty about homeschooling. If he were in a classroom, he would have to sit at a desk to read, but he doesn't have to. You're at home. If he wants to jump on the trampoline when he does his spelling words or play hopscotch when he does his math or whatever. If they need to move, it's okay. They can move.
A
And that
rocking
really-
chair. A
No,
rocking
rocking
chair was
chair.
the biggest savior for us, because when I would look at my son and say, sit still, all he was thinking was, I can't move, I can't move, I can't move. And he didn't hear a thing I said. But if I put him in a rocking chair so he was moving, or let him sit on the floor and play Legos, as long as he kept his mouth shut and his hands were occupied.
Thinking
They could
putty is a
learn.
good thing for a child with
Yes.
ADD.
Right, and it's different for each child. My two
Mhm.
are completely different. My daughter is always even putting puzzles together while we did read alouds.
Yep.
And we stop, ask a question, and she could answer it immediately. So she was able to focus working with her hands. And my
Right.
son was the opposite. He did need to sit next to me on the couch.
My son did too.
And so
Yeah.
I had
yeah.
one that was thoroughly distracted by anything else that was going on. You could put a book in front of her, but if an ant walked across the table, she would stop and pay attention to that. Or if a car drove by and beeped a horn, she had to stop and look out the window. About the time that we were struggling with that, we had to replace our refrigerator. And you might wonder what that has to do with focus, but we took the refrigerator box and we cut it down and we made her a cube, a cubicle. And so she would sit at the dining room table inside her cubicle, and she was then not distracted visually by things that were going on around her. It sounded silly to me when this friend of mine who'd been homeschooling 5 or 6 years longer than I had said to me, don't throw away that refrigerator box, make her a cubicle. What a huge difference cardboard made in her focus.
I had a son that was taking a long time with math, and he's very competitive. So I used a timer and I just set it for 10 minutes. And I said, okay, I want to see how much you can get finished in 10 minutes. Let's just see how many problems. And then he would, do the 10 minutes, and I would come and check, okay, this many. And then I would say, okay, let's set it for 10 more. You want a break? You want to go do something? You want to go get a snack? Oh, okay, we might do that. And then he'd come back and I'd set the timer for 10 minutes. And then he would do that again and see if he could beat his time from before. He's just really competitive. So beating the clock, beating that timer was very motivational.
That was great for my boys. My daughter would stress out, I'm not going to finish, so again,
Yeah, you have to know
each
your
child is
child.
different.
Right.
You try something, it works with one, not the other. It's okay.
Right.
You're not failing. It's just different.
It is. And one thing I like about homeschooling is the fact that, with my daughter that had issues with that, we could take breaks as often as we had to, because she could not sit there for, a long period of time and go from subject to subject to subject or whatever. So, if we did one subject and then, okay, take a break, like you said, either run around or do something else, or just get off that page for a while and then come back. And so that's one thing I love about homeschooling, because like you said, if they're in school, you're sitting there, you're doing it till it's done. You have no options. So I loved it, being able to tailor that.
I think too, thinking about specifically with Sonlight, the read alouds. So you think about focus for read alouds. I think engaging them on the topic before you start to read, like, what do you know about this? What questions do you have? If it's, do you know, this is about somebody in Philadelphia. Do you know anything about Philadelphia? What do you remember? We went there. What do you remember about it? And then just engaging them in that subject. Then they know something to look for as you're reading. They have something specific in mind. Maybe you know a little bit about what happened in chapter 1 through 5 before you read, so you kind of quickly cover that, and then give them a few things to look for. And then afterward, what did you learn that you didn't know before? Those are good things to focus in on what you're reading.
What about socialization? That's a question we get a lot. It's hard this year. And this specific question was about a kindergartner, but then I was thinking we could talk a little bit about how to get the social aspect for any age, really. So do you have any ideas on that?
I think everybody's focusing on, everybody is experiencing this together. So I think that's a huge thing to remind yourselves and them. Isaac Newton, I learned it this week, experienced this during the Great Plague. He, I forget the year, but I think it ended in a 6, and whatever the year was, and he had to come home from Cambridge because of the Great Plague, and he was there. He didn't get to go back until the year that ended in 8. I can't remember what the year was, but anyway, for more than a calendar year, he was at home, and they were putting red X's on everybody's houses that were infected. So we're not the only ones that have experienced this. Other people have, and I think that's important. Your kids don't have that context. Remind them of that. And then, you know, one thing I was thinking about was about reaching out. Sometimes thinking about others, maybe think about an elderly neighbor that you could reach out to, draw pictures for, go to visit if you're not, or, you know, maybe not go visit. Send a card, make a card, FaceTime or Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah, in my community, we have a group that meets at the park every second Thursday. And so it's outdoors. So it kind of depends on what the regulations are in your area. But getting outdoors is a great way to get some social involvement.
Before
these
this started,
days.
that was like overwhelmingly the thing we had to say was get outside, take them outside. There'll be other families who need to be outside too,
Right.
especially on a nice day. But also Zoom is a really good option. We wrote cards to people. We also had Zoom meetings or Zoom, corporate America, right? Zoom conversations with family that we wouldn't have otherwise had. We wouldn't have seen. They were out of state or whatever. And so it opened up the opportunity to have Zoom conversations with cousins. And we figured out how to play games on Zoom with other families. So there's definitely.
In our life group this year, so my kids, of course, are grown. I don't have that particular thing going on, but our life group has some young kids. And so they created a COVID bubble, they called it, and it was 3 families, and they would get together at the beach and mostly outdoors. And knowing that, yes, they're getting out and exposing themselves to other kids, but really those were the only other kids that they were playing with. And so there was a level of safety with that. And those children were so desperate for community that they played really well together. Like, you know, like all of a sudden they're on their best behavior because, oh, well, we can't go play with them if you can't, you know, I mean, you can dangle that as a carrot for their schoolwork.
There you go.
Yeah, I think it just depends on where you are in the country and in the world. Your
Yeah.
restrictions vary based on where you are. But I would definitely encourage you to join the Facebook group, Sonlight Connections, which is, you can find a link to it at sonlight.com/connections, and connect with another kindergarten family. This particular question was a kindergarten family. So that's hard, right? You haven't been doing this a whole lot. You don't really know other people who are your age. Go on there, see if you can find someone who is close in age and who's willing to meet socially distanced, who's willing to have a picnic in the park on a nice day, or willing to go on a Zoom call with you or FaceTime, or even in that group, you can have group chats and they're video chats. So you could get your kids on the video chat together. So that's an option as well. Book clubs. That was another thing we sort of talked about.
Yeah, even if you don't have a formal book club, I'm right now reading a book recommended by my 26-year-old nephew who's in South Korea, and he's away. And so I wanted to connect with him. So I found out his favorite, you know, a book he'd read recently that he really liked, and I'm reading it, and so that we can interact about it. And you could do that with another family, with a child at the same level. Or we sent one of the from each of the boys' programs this year, I purchased for my mom for Christmas one of the books that they're reading. And at first she kind of didn't seem like she was like, oh, it's a middle school book, you know, thanks, you know. But I had heard you talk about your son's grandfather, and I thought that is great for right now, because my mom needed, I mean, like they need, all of our parents need, you know,
All of
us need connection right now. And if they're older and aren't getting out, you know, then it's especially a time. And so she said, I was really discouraged. I picked it up and I thought, this is a middle school book and I cannot get into this. And then she looked at the back. It was one of those books that has some other languages mixed in, you know, and it had a list of definitions or whatever. And she was like, that's all I needed to do. I read the whole book and I loved it. You know, it was one of the ones from Eastern Hemisphere. And so she read that book, and now then she was able to interact with my son about it. And we got that idea from you. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but I think the whole idea that we're all in this together. And so if you take the first step and reach out to another family, like maybe from church, or if your son has a friend that maybe you don't know them well, but you can just reach out and say, hey, you know, does Jimmy want to come over and play with Scotty? And you might form a new friendship too. So sometimes it just takes someone willing to take the first step, and that someone might have to be you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have one more question this is a surprise question for you guys because I didn't get a chance to talk to you about it, but it is, how do you get dad involved in homeschool?
My favorite way to get my husband involved, which helped me out a lot, was science, because he really likes science. I do not. And so I would do the science reading and worksheets and whatnot throughout the week with the kids. But we saved the experiments for my husband on the weekends, and he got such a kick out of it. And because he was so into it, it really drew the kids into it too. So I was very thankful for that, because I probably would have looked at it as a chore and dragged my way through it. And I'm sure that would not have been enthusiastic for my children.
And we did the same thing with math. Math is a foreign language for me, but my husband's degree is in math. And so he would be responsible for teaching math with the kids. And they enjoyed it because they got a break from mom. And so their dad was being able to teach that, but they also enjoyed it because they realized very quickly that dad knew what he was talking about. Mom did not. So
I will say too, maybe ask dad first, because I heard so many people on, you know, in Facebook world or wherever, other Sonlight people talking about how, oh, my husband does all the science experiments. And I was like, oh, what a great idea. And so I, you know, told my husband, oh, guess what? There's a lot of people that, you know, and he was like, okay, you know, and he was not enthused about this idea. So I set it all up for them one night. They did it. I took pictures. It's in the Sonlight catalog a long time ago. They did one science experiment together. That was it. It was not his plan.
Aww.
And so, but other things, you know, this, the kindergarten readers. Oh, you know how there's so many times that they read that reader and you're listening to them sound out the words and you think you might pull your hair out. So the first reading was always with me. And then I would send them to dad for another night. So like maybe on Monday you read with me, on Tuesday you read with dad, on Wednesday you read with your brother, on Thursday you read with the baby that can't even understand what you're saying. And then on Friday you come back and you read it with me. And they really were much better by the end of the week. And that saved me from having to listen to this kindergarten reader sounding out all those words. So that was one thing. He discussed his books with them. There's a lot of things that he does now. He makes dinner. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Find what he loves. Don't expect him to do science experiments if he doesn't want to.
Yeah, and if there's no expertise, like they're a math expert or a science expert, read alouds are real good at bedtime sometimes.
Yeah.
And if his work day is such that he's home at bedtime, that's a real special thing. I was not homeschooled myself, but my dad read to me every single night, and that was very special. And so that's definitely something, even if you homeschool.
Yeah,
Dads can do
we
that.
did that as well with my husband, because by 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I was done. Like I had been with the kids all day and done the laundry and the cooking and all the things. And so by 6 o'clock, I was like, you take the kids and do the whole bedtime thing, and then I will clean the kitchen willingly. I get the kid, like I get a space to myself, and he would do the read aloud at bedtime. I've also heard of dads doing breakfast and Bible. So they might lead a devotion and use the Bible at breakfast time before they go to work, depending on their schedule.
Yeah. And for older kids, my husband took on driver's ed, which I was very thankful for. And he, you know, and like, you know, she was saying, these are things he wanted to do. You know, he was wanting to be involved, and these were things he was interested in. So that was another area that he became involved. All 4 kids, he taught them to drive.
For my older guys, financial planning. My husband loves, and they listen to a podcasts together when they're in the car, and they talk about it, and and he goes through these videos and watches the financial planning with them. And so, yeah, he loves it.
But I think Christy makes a really good point, and that is make sure you have dad's buy-in first.
Yeah.
And it's not always possible. And so if dad is not able to be engaged, a lot of dads are deployed or in the military overseas
Yep.
and are not available. That does not mean that your homeschool is not successful or that your husband doesn't care. It just, those are ways, some ways that families have dads be involved, but it's not always possible.
Well, I've also heard of deployed dads reading to their kids
Mhm.
over Zoom or FaceTime or
Sure.
Facebook Live or whatever.
What she says is important, because I'm talking about 12 over the course of 12 years. And
Yes.
there were certainly more years that he was in the office and needed to be, and had things that were there on the schedule. And so, and we have single moms or single dads. We have, we have all sorts of situations. So yeah, that's important to say that I'm thinking about over the course of 12 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mom, I appreciate you all sharing your knowledge with everyone. I'm so grateful that you guys were able to join us. I'd love to hear what you thought of this event. You can email me at srose@sonlight.com. Please do that. I would love the feedback. And I'm just so grateful that you guys were here. I hope this is helpful. Remember, everything is available for the next 30 days. And if nothing else, we wish you the best 2021 and hope that you can continue homeschooling just as you started and continue on strong. So that's what we're hoping for. Thank you for joining.